Hello, Froggy here. Oftentimes in Destiny, you need to cross a chasm or climb a cliffside to continue your campaign into the unknown. Today, we'll be going over various methods of height and flight within Destiny 2. We'll start off with one of the most versatile techniques in the game, sword flying. You'll want to use a Titan with catapult lift, as well as lion rampant. You'll also need a sword. Ideally, you'll want one with max ammo. Sword flying works by using the boost of catapult lift, along with the hang time of swinging a sword. As long as you're not falling too fast, a sword swing will keep you at the same height and defy gravity. Catapult lift recharges in the air, so as long as you leave enough time for the amount you use to recharge, you can actually use any cadence you want. Just be sure to turn your jump off so it can recharge. So as you can see here, I'm using a very short jump and quicker swings, and you can switch back and forth between these. If you're going for distance, you want to use as little ammo as possible, but if you're in a more confined area, you might need to use short jumps and swing more rapidly to stay about level. You might reasonably think that the sword is the most important part of sword flying, but really it's catapult lift. Since it recharges in the air, it never runs out. You don't even technically need a sword to sword fly. With the new Titan Super, you can use the forward melee to replace the sword swings. It also keeps you mostly in the air. In practice, anything that provides additional hang time can be used with catapult lift to fly. Glacial Quake is quite handy for that. Once it runs out, you can easily transition back into the sword variant. One of the most common issues people have with sword flying is using too much of their jump and not giving enough time for it to recharge. As you can see, I slowly lose height and eventually just fall. If you have that happening, you need to slow down. So how does sword flying do on the height gain front? Sadly, not very well. It seems almost like you're hitting a ceiling, and that's because you are. Catapult lift sets a height ceiling when you first jump. That means if you start sword flying from higher up, you can actually gain quite a bit of height. So when you're sword flying, it helps to start from higher up, even if you don't need to use that height right away. Before Beyond Light, it didn't really matter which sword you used, but now there is a clear champion. When you hold block and swing with the Lament, you have a faster and longer swing. So how much does this help us overall? Here you can see using a normal sword versus using the Lament on one of the longest useful sword flights I know of, from the top of the Confluence to the Harbinger's Seclude Ascendant Challenge. As you can see, in the same amount of time, we covered much more distance, even though we had less ammo to start with, not to mention that coat of the missile. Swords can help other classes too. Hunters, for instance, can use Tether's multi-shot and sword swings to stretch their distance out. That alone doesn't get you too much distance, but as a hunter, you take what you can get. Warlocks have top tree Dawnblade, along with aiming down sights with Wings of Sacred Dawn, which gives you quite a nice slow glide. Of course, the Super gives you quite a lot of distance as well. This glide is so effective that it actually gives you time to get your Super back. Unfortunately, you're still losing height overall, and it takes a very long time. For reference, it took our sword flying about 3.5 minutes to do this. Let's see how long it takes a Warlock. While it's quite effective for short trips, I wouldn't recommend it for the long haul, unless you have a lot of patience. It took over twice as long. Although it struggles in most applications, Nova Warp can be really good for crossing large gaps. Its main advantage is that it lets you have Blink equipped, which can get you past some kill floors. Nova Warp also has some applications in climbing. You can use the Sprint Blink effect to stay roughly in place while you wait for your Jump Blink to recharge. It doesn't get you terribly high, but it does get you a decent way up. Before we jump into some higher reaching options, let's check out one of the newcomers with Salvation Script. Naturally, you can use this for climbing, but the shot also has a timer, so if you shoot it straight up, it will pop around level, and you can actually keep doing this to fly out. It's something of a novelty, but you technically could combine this with a second person to stretch out sword flying distance. Might come in handy if you absolutely need that last few couple feet and don't have access to sparrows. Speaking of which, among all hide and flight techniques, there is one that reigns supreme. Sparrow Flying. Unlimited height, infinite flight. The world is yours to explore, at least whenever you have a sparrow. Let's take a look at some perks. You'll definitely want to have vernier thrusters. It gives you more side boosts. Destabilizers is necessary because it lets you spin in the air. Always on Time doesn't appear to have vernier thrusters, but it does as a hidden perk. So, once again, it's just the best sparrow. I'll be breaking this down into a few easy steps. You're going to want to start off in the air. Once in the air, summon your sparrow. All sparrows have instant summon now, so that'll be easy. Once you summon, activate destabilizers briefly and hold to the left. The longer you hold down these stabilizers for, the faster you'll spin. Try to see if you can land upright. The next step is to right boost as soon as you summon. This will boost you up into the air a little bit. You'll want to do it about when your sparrow is vertical and the right side is flat. After that, follow it up with a left boost. Once again when your sparrow is flat and the bottom is to the left. You can alternate these to stay about in place in the air. Now if you want to move elsewhere, you can change up the timing of your dodges. If we instead have the angle of our sparrow be about 45, pointing towards the right, we can fly upwards and rightwards. You can also resummon in air to get your boosts back. In between cycles, you can change your camera angle to help change directions and see where you're going. This is very handy anywhere you can resummon. Now, if you can't summon sparrows, it gets to be a bit trickier. But it is still possible to fly. You just need to give time for your boost to recharge. To do this, you want to make sure you have plenty of upwards momentum so that you can recover the distance that you fall. Sparrow flying definitely takes some practice. I'd recommend trying it in places where you have a long way to fall. Infinite sparrow flying takes more practice. I'm still working out the kinks myself. But there is something that can help you out. It turns out gravity is somewhat frame rate dependent. So if you cap your frames at 30, you'll have a much easier time. So how does this affect jumping? Let's go take a look. So here I have my normal glitching armor with max mobility. And with high lift I can just barely make it up here. I have to clamber at the top. So let's go adjust our frame rate down to 30 and see what happens. As you can see, I just made it straight to the top. Didn't have to clamber at all. So this is not my glitching armor. It has 0 mobility. You can see I didn't even get close to the top. So let's cap our frames again and see what happens. You can see I can just barely clamber onto the top. Isn't the easiest thing to do, so not quite as good. However, capping at 30 was almost as good as max mobility. In many games, you can use rockets or other explosives to augment your jump height. In Destiny, that doesn't really work so well. There are, however, suitably dangerous alternatives. If you side boost while dismounting a pike, you can pinch yourself against vertical surfaces and get a fairly decent launch. You can also take advantage of the middle tree solar grenade and a Titan shoulder charge to launch you in the air. To do this, you'll want to hold your grenade and jump just before you get charged. Once you've been hit, activate your jump to lock in your momentum and you'll sail up into the air. This will also work with top tree solar, although the timer on that means you have less time to pull it off. It may be worth it for the super. This comes in handy when there's no structures to climb and you still need to gain height. Top tree solar nade has its own uses as well. If you've seen prophecy speedruns, you've probably seen this little shortcut. What you might not know is this is a general technique as well. It works anywhere that you have a suitably steep surface. This wall outside of Deepstone Crypt is nearly vertical, and I can easily climb up it. You can even chain it into a super for added benefit. Naturally, I could have just Sparrow flown here, but that way is a bit flashier. So we've seen what fire can do. How about ice? As long as you've got a wall around, stasis can be used to climb pretty much anything. You'll want to have Whisper of Shards, which will give you quick charge on your grenades whenever you pop them. You'll also want as high discipline as you can manage. It can be helpful to lower your light level so that it's easier to break your stasis crystals, but that's completely optional. Going to jump up, put down ice, and pop 2 grenades. The max stack is 10 seconds, so we want to wait till it gets down to 5. 3 is sufficient to get your entire grenade back. You can still jump a little bit after the shards disappear. If you pop an additional shard, you can get a little bit more leeway, but it isn't strictly speaking necessary. This process can be a bit tedious, so can we do better? The answer is yes. If you have 2 people, you can double your speed. Simply have one person throw grenades on the left, and another throw grenades on the right. You can then throw your next grenade from the level that the other person got to. With 3 people, you could speed this process up even more. If you don't have too far to climb, the Stasis Super will do quite nicely. As long as you're touching the wall, you won't break the ice that you're standing on. So you can stack ice on top of the ice you've already put down, gaining tremendous height quickly. Once it runs out, you still have time to climb up the rest. Of course, you can stasis climb from there. If you only need moderate distance or height, Code of the Missile may be enough. But these days it's outshone by most of the previous methods. Well, that's about all I've got for now. Hopefully this will aid you in traveling far and wide, whether overland or without it. I've covered a lot of ground here, so before I go, I'll do a recap for the techniques I use most often in my day-to-day exploration. Need flight? Grab a sword. Start high to get high. Augment with stasis for distance, or missile for height. Need height? Sparrows are king. If they're unavailable but you've got a wall, try some ice climbing. Where walls abandon you, try a launch instead. And now it's time to reach new heights as we continue our exploration of destiny.